After the verdict, the court ruling should have been the end of it. Legally, it was. Emotionally, it WASN single quotes taught Karen stopped attending HOA meetings immediately after the judgment. Not that it mattered, she no longer had authority. The gavel didn't just dismiss her lawsuit. It dismantled her position. Years of control evaporated in a single afternoon. But power doesn't always disappear quietly. It lingers. It festers. It waits. The neighborhood changed after Billy's death, not in loud, dramatic ways. No protests, no confrontations, just a subtle shift. Conversations lowered when certain doors opened. Eyes held contact longer. People who once avoided involvement suddenly had opinions, and opinions spread. At first, I thought the silence meant peace. Then the letters started, not official ones. Handwritten, no return address. The first said, "You could have sold it." The second, "You knew he wanted it." The third was shorter. Blood isn't always visible. I didn't show anyone, not yet, because I understood something about grief. Grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through people who need a villain to sleep at night. Karen had lost her authority, but she hadn't lost allies. There were still a few neighbors who believed tragedy needed balance, that someone had to pay. Even if the court had already decided who was responsible, I installed more cameras, not out of fear. Out of habit. Documentation had saved me once. It would again if needed. Weeks passed, then months. Winter arrived quietly. The street looked smaller without the Harley parked in front of my house. The empty space became permanent. No new bike replaced it. Didn't want one. One evening, as frost clung to mailboxes and breath turned visible in the air, I noticed Karen, standing across the street, not speaking, not shouting, just watching my house. She looked different, smaller, like the world had reduced her dimensions. Grief had carved sharp lines into her face. The arrogance was gone. What replaced it wasn't humility, it was emptiness. I considered walking over. I didn't, because some distances are necessary. Spring came, and with it, the HOA elections. The first time in years, people actually showed up. The meeting room filled beyond capacity. Folding chairs scraped across tile floors. Conversations buzzed with cautious optimism. Karen didn't attend. A new board was elected. Quieter people. Practical people. The type who preferred landscaping discussions over power struggles. One of them approached me afterward. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Not about the bike, not about the lawsuit, about the silence. That apology mattered, more than the verdict. I thought the story would fade there. It didn't one afternoon. Nearly 8 months after the crash, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. I answered anyway. It was Karen. Her voice was steady. To steady, I need to talk. She said, not an accusation, not a threat. We met at a neutral place. Quiet cafe 2 towns over. Public, open, safe. She looked older. Grief accelerates time for a long moment. She said nothing. Just stared at the untouched coffee in front of her. Then, I read the court transcript again. She said, I didn't respond. I wanted to find the mistake, the bias, the angle, something unfair. Her fingers tightened around the cup.
There.
Wasn't one. That was the closest thing to an apology she could manage. She didn't say sorry. She said, I failed him. And for the first time, she didn't mean me. She meant Billy. He always wanted things fast, she continued. Fast. Money, fast respect, fast machines. A brittle laugh escaped her. I thought protecting him meant clearing obstacles. She looked up at me. I never taught him consequences. There it was. Not forgiveness, not redemption, just truth. We sat in silence after that closure speech. No dramatic reconciliation. Just two people connected by an event neither could undo before leaving. She said something that stayed with me. I blamed you because blaming myself was heavier. And that was the most honest thing she'd ever spoken. After that meeting, the letters stopped. The tension dissolved slowly. Like ice under steady sun, Karen sold her house that summer. No announcement, no goodbye. A moving truck arrived at dawn. And left before noon, the house stayed empty for weeks before a young family bought it. Kids played in the yard again. Laughter returned to that side of the street. Life doesn't pause forever. It ranges. As for me, I kept the footage, not out of paranoia. Out of memory, sometimes accountability isn't about punishment. It's about record. Billy made a choice. Karen made choices. I made choices. Only one of us rode that bike. That truth remains unchanged, and every now and then, when the evening air is still and the streetlights hum faintly overhead, I imagine what might have happened if I had sold it that first week. Maybe he would have crashed later. Maybe not at all. Maybe something else would have taken its place. But speculation is a dangerous road. It rewrites reality into fantasy, and reality, no matter how brutal, is solid. Unmovable. Like a parked motorcycle under a quiet sky, the weight of quiet streets, people think tragedy explodes. Most of the time, it settles like dust. It drifts into corners, under doors, into conversations that pretend to be about something else. After Karen moved away, the neighborhood tried to reset. Fresh paint, trimmed hedges, block parties scheduled earlier in the year than usual, as if celebration could overwrite memory. But memory doesn't live in houses. It lives in people. The empty space where the Quali used to sit became symbolic. Neighbors walked past it slower than necessary. Some glanced down. Some avoided looking at it entirely. It had become a landmark without an object, the place where that story began. I stayed quieter than before, not withdrawn, just observant, because once you've been blamed for someone's death publicly, legally, emotionally, you start paying closer attention to how narratives form, and narratives were still forming. I began noticing small distortions in how the story was retold. Asterisk. At a barbecue, I overheard someone say, "Yeah, he left the bike out, knowing the kid was obsessed." That wasn't true, another added. I heard they were arguing the week before. Also false. Truth doesn't vanish. It mutates, and unless corrected, it becomes accepted. For a while, I considered confronting every version, correcting every detail, producing timestamps and screenshots like exhibits in an endless trial. But I stopped myself. The court had handled facts. What lingered now wasn't legal. It was psychological. People needed the story to feel balanced. Some needed me slightly guilty, so the world felt predictable. If I had done something differently, then the outcome was avoidable. If the outcome was avoidable, then random tragedy wasn't real. That illusion comforts people, even if it costs someone else their reputation. 6 months after Karen left, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived. This one had a return address. It was from Karen, not handwritten this time. Typed, short, direct. She informed me she had started attending grief counseling, that she had spent weeks replaying footage in her mind, footage she had once denied existed. That the therapist asked her a question she couldn't escape. If the bike hadn't been there, would your son have made better choices, or just different ones? She wrote that the question disturbed her because the honest answer was clear. Billy had a pattern long before the Harley. The bike wasn't the origin, it was the amplifier. At the bottom of the letter, she wrote, "You were never the reason, you were the occasion." There's a difference. An occasion presents opportunity. A reason drives action. For the first time, she acknowledged that distinction. I didn't respond. Some closures don't require dialogue. Time moved forward the way it always does, indifferent and efficient. The new family across the street brought routine noise back into the area. Kids' bikes scattered across sidewalks. Basketball thumps echoing off driveways. Summer evenings smelling like charcoal and cut grass. One afternoon, I noticed something that tightened my chest unexpectedly. A small red dirt bike leaned against the new neighbor's garage. The father was teaching his son how to ride. Helmet secure. Gloves fitted. Instructions calm and deliberate. I watched longer than I meant to. The boy stalled twice, nearly tipped once. Each time, the father steadied him before letting go again. Guided risk, supervised power. It struck me how different that scene was from Billy's. Billy never wanted guidance. He wanted possession. He didn't want to learn the machine. He wanted to conquer it. There's a difference, and it matters. That night, I dreamed of the auction. Again, the buzzing lights, the smell of oil and polished metal. The moment my paddle lifted, I had replayed that second many times over the past year, examining it like a photograph under magnification. Was there hesitation? Was there instinct? Was there warning? No, just impulse, harmless at the time. Life rarely announces which small decisions will ripple. That's what unsettles people most. Not the crash, not the lawsuit, but the randomness of sequence. If I had stayed home that day, if Billy had blinked a second slower, if Karen had taught accountability instead of shielding ego, so many ifs. But reality doesn't negotiate with hypotheticals. About a year after the accident, the HOA invited me to speak at a community forum. The topic was accountability and neighbor relations. The irony wasn't lost on me. I almost declined. Then I accepted not to lecture, not to reopen wounds, but to stabilize the narrative once and for all. The room was full. I didn't bring notes. I didn't bring footage. I just told the story plainly. No dramatics, no anger, no villain monologue. I described the auction, the harassment, the theft, the crash, and I ended with this. Ownership isn't provocation. Envy isn't injustice. And tragedy doesn't erase responsibility. Silence followed, not uncomfortable, reflective, when I sat down. No one clapped immediately. They were thinking, that mattered more. Afterward, a teenager approached me quietly. He said, I knew Billy. He used to brag about taking stuff. I guess I thought it was funny. He paused. It's not funny anymore. That was the first moment I felt something close to purpose emerge from the chaos. Not redemption, not meaning, but caution passed forward. That evening, I walked past the old parking spot again. For the first time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt neutral, just pavement, just space. The story no longer lived there. It had moved into memory, organized, understood, no longer mutating. And I realized something important. The real damage wasn't the bike, it wasn't the lawsuit, it wasn't even the crash. It was the distortion of responsibility. Once that distortion was corrected, publicly, legally, emotionally, the weight lifted, not completely, but enough. Some people still whisper, some always will. But whispers lose power when truth is stable. Billy's choice ended his life. Karen's choices nearly ruined others. My choice was to stand firm and document reality. 3 different decisions. 3 different consequences. That's not revenge. That's structure and structure. Unlike emotion, doesn't bend for sympathy. When stories refuse to stay buried, die a thought speaking publicly would end it. I was wrong. Truth doesn't always conclude a story. Sometimes it invites new versions. A few weeks after the forum, a local blogger reached out. Neighborhood news. Human interest, angle. Accountability, Power. Tragedy, all the keywords that travel fast online. I declined, not because I feared exposure, because I understood distortion. Once a story leaves its original environment, it stops belonging to facts and starts belonging to audiences, and audiences don't want accuracy. They want alignment. Still. Fragments leaked. Someone who attended the forum shared a summary. Someone else paraphrased that summary. Someone added emotion where memory was thin. Soon, comments appeared online. Anonymous, confident, wrong. Some called me cold. Others calculated. A few insisted morality should outweigh legality, as if feelings could substitute evidence. That's when I realized something unsettling. People weren't debating what happened. They were debating how badly they wanted a villain. And when the obvious one didn't satisfy them, they went shopping. One afternoon, I received a message from someone I didn't recognize. It was from Billy's old school friend. He said he'd been quiet for a long time. That guilt had a way of fermenting. He told me Billy had stolen before. Small things at first. Helmets, tools. A neighbor's scooter once, returned dented with an excuse. No consequences. Every time someone intervened, Karen neutralized it. He's a good kid. He's just misunderstood. He has big dreams. Dreams don't excuse behavior. They magnify it. The message ended with something that stuck with me. We all saw the pattern. We just thought it wasn't our place to stop it. That sentence explained more than any court ruling ever could. Silence isn't neutral, it's participation delayed. The HOA stabilized after that year. Fewer letters, fewer confrontations. Meetings ended on time. Rules were boring again. That's how you know an HOA is functioning properly. Boring, but my name still carried weight. Not authority, just recognition. People nodded differently now, some with respect, some with discomfort. Being right doesn't make you popular, it makes you isolated in a specific way. Not alone, just carefully observed. One evening, a father across the street knocked on my door. He asked if I minded him storing the dirt bike. Closer to the fence, he explained his son was learning restraint, that they practiced braking more than acceleration, that the kid wanted speed, but they emphasized control. I heard what happened before we moved in. He said carefully. I waited. I just wanted you to know, he continued, we're teaching responsibility first. I nodded. That conversation mattered more than he realized, because it confirmed something important. The neighborhood wasn't just healing, it was adapting. Later that night, I revisited the footage. Not the crash aftermath, the auction, the moment. The Harley rolled in. I paused on the frame where chrome caught the overhead light. Bright, tempting, neutral. An object doesn't choose its owner. A machine doesn't choose its rider. People do, and once chosen, they bring their character with them. Power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. Billy revealed recklessness. Karen revealed control masked as protection. The HOA revealed cowardice until consequences. Forced courage, and I revealed something quieter. Refusal to be rewritten. About 18 months after the accident, I received a legal notice, not against me. From Karen, she was contesting the civil penalties. Again, grief had cooled into bitterness. But this time, something was different. No one rallied behind her. Former allies declined to testify. Neighbors refused to submit statements. Even her lawyer advised settlement. The narrative had stabilized. There was nothing left to bend. The appeal failed. Quickly, silently, without spectacle, power fades fastest. When no one reacts to it anymore, I started volunteering after that. Not publicly, not connected to the case. I mentored at a local program that taught mechanical safety engines. Tools, responsibility. Teenagers listened more than I expected. Maybe because I didn't preach. I just explained consequences. Torque, momentum, Mistakes. Physics. It's honest. It doesn't negotiate, you respect it, or it punishes ignorance. That lesson landed harder than morality ever could. One kid asked me once, "Did you hate him?" The guy who crashed. I thought carefully. "No," I said. "I hated the lies that came after." That surprised him. "Hating the wrong thing wastes energy," I added. "And energy is dangerous when you don't control it." He nodded like that made sense. It did. Occasionally, I still hear the phrase, "You're the reason my son is dead." It echoes sometimes when the night is too quiet. But now it doesn't sting, because I know what reason actually means. A reason requires intent. I had none. An opportunity requires presence. Life is full of those we don't jail intersections because crashes happen there. We hold drivers accountable. Karen never contacted me again after the failed appeal. I heard she moved farther away. Smaller town. Smaller influence. That seemed fitting. Some people need reduced environments to confront themselves, and some never do. The streetlights still buzz in the evening. Kids still ride bikes. Engines still exist. But something invisible changed. There's a pause now. Before action, before assumption, before entitlement. That pause saves lives more often than rules ever will. The echo of accountability by the second year. The story stopped being recent. It became history, and history is quieter than rumor. The neighborhood fully stabilized. Property values rose again. New paint replaced old resentment. The HOA newsletters went back to discussing lawn heights and mailbox designs instead of community threats. But every story leaves residue, not visible, structural. I noticed it in small ways when a teenager sped through the street one afternoon. 3 different adults stepped outside immediately. Not yelling, not hostile, just present. Presence is prevention. That hadn't existed before. Before, people preferred distance. Now, they preferred involvement. That was new. One evening, I received an unexpected invitation. The local high school wanted a guest speaker for a senior assembly. The topic, choices and consequences, apparently. The mechanical safety program director had mentioned my name. I hesitated. Teenagers don't respond well to lectures, but they respond to reality. So I agreed. The auditorium was louder than I expected. Restless energy, phones glowing, conversations half muted. I didn't bring slides. I didn't mention names. I've told him about power, not motorcycles specifically. Power in general, how it feels intoxicating when you first touch it. How it convinces you that skill is optional. How ego whispers that rules apply to other people. Then I explained something simple. Speed multiplies mistakes. That line settled the room more than any emotional appeal could have. I described how a single reckless decision doesn't just affect one person. It fractures parents, neighbors, reputations, entire streets. I didn't dramatize the crash. I didn't need to. The silence did the work. Afterward, a student approached me. "Did he think he wouldn't get caught?" she asked. "No," I said. "He thought he wouldn't get hurt." That difference matters. Teenagers fear punishment. They don't always fear physics. That night, I realized something. The story had shifted roles. It was no longer about blame. It had become a cautionary tale. Not sensational, practical, and that transformation mattered because stories that remain emotional stay unstable. Stories that become instructional gain structure around that time. I drove past a motorcycle dealership. I hadn't stepped into one since the accident. I slowed, paused, then kept driving. Not out of fear, out of clarity. I didn't need another machine to prove resilience. The absence of the Harley no longer felt like loss. It felt like completion. Karen resurfaced once more, indirectly. A mutual acquaintance mentioned she had begun speaking at small grief support groups. She talked about denial, about shielding children from consequences, about confusing protection with permission. That surprised me. Growth often happens offstage. There was no public apology, no reconciliation. Headline: but change doesn't require an audience to be real if she truly understood her role. That was enough, not for forgiveness, for balance. One late summer evening, thunderstorm rolled in fast. Heavy rain, sharp wind, the kind that forces everyone indoors. I stood at my window watching water flood the curb. For a moment, just a flicker. I remembered the night someone had loosened the bike cover to let rain soak the leather seat. Petty sabotage. Small, deliberate cruelty. Back then, it felt personal. Now it felt distant, almost trivial, because the escalation that followed made that act look insignificant. It's strange how scale changes perception. What once felt like attack now feels like a warning sign ignored. A few weeks later, the father across the street asked if I'd help tune his son's dirt bike. The kid had progressed. Controlled throttle, careful braking. We worked in the driveway together. I showed him how to check tension in the chain, how to listen to engine rhythm instead of forcing it louder. Machines talk, I told him, if you pay attention. He nodded seriously. Kids like instruction when it's respectful. Before leaving, he said something that caught me off guard. My dad says I don't get the fast stuff until I prove I can handle the slow stuff. I smiled. That's a smart rule. Because that's the rule Billy never learned. The street no longer whispers my name. It doesn't need to. The narrative is stable. Stable stories don't require constant defense. And stability is the quietest form of victory. Not triumph, not revenge. Just equilibrium restored. Some nights, when everything is still, I replay the very first ride home from the auction. The controlled purr of the engine. The curious stares. The moment before envy entered the quage. That memory remains clean, untouched by what followed. And I protect that version deliberately. Because not every beginning deserves to be rewritten by its ending. If there's a lesson embedded in all of this, it's simple. You cannot control what others desire. You cannot control how they respond to denial. You cannot prevent every reckless decision made in your proximity. But you can control documentation. You can control composure. You can control truth. And sometimes, that's enough to survive being someone else's scapegoat. Consequences don't knock. They arrive by the third year. The story stopped belonging to the street. It belonged to memory. New neighbors had moved in who didn't know the details. They only knew fragments that there had been a lawsuit, an accident, tension once. Nothing sharp, nothing specific. Time. Files edges down. That's what it does best. But even when events fade publicly, privately, they organize themselves into something permanent. Not pain structure. I no longer thought about Billy every day, but when I did, it wasn't with anger. It was with clarity. Because what happened wasn't dramatic in the way people prefer. It was mechanical. Choice, action, consequence, simple, sequence. The world isn't complicated when stripped of emotion. It's precise. Billy wanted power without earning it. Karen wanted control without accountability. The neighborhood wanted comfort without involvement. And I wanted peace without surrender. Each of us acted accordingly. Only one outcome was irreversible. 1. Autumn evening, the father across the street invited me over for dinner. Nothing formal, just neighbors sharing space. His son, now more confident, steadier, talked about upgrading to a larger bike someday, but not yet, he added quickly. I have to qualify. Qualify. That word stayed with me. Earned. Progression. Measured growth, it sounded so obvious, so normal. Yet its absence had destroyed another household. Later that night, walking back to my own house, I paused in the driveway. The spot where the Harley once stood no longer felt symbolic. It felt ordinary. That's when I knew the story had fully settled. When a place stops echoing, you're free. A few weeks later, I received one final piece of correspondence. Not from Karen, from her handwritten, short no. Return address, it read, "I used to think consequences were cruel. Now I understand they are neutral." I wish I had taught him that sooner. No signature. She didn't need one. For a long time. I held that letter without reacting. Then I placed it in a folder with the court documents and the old screenshots. Not as ammunition, as record. Because documentation isn't about revenge. It's about closure that doesn't rely on memory alone. People often ask, quietly, carefully, if I would do anything differently. If I could go back to the auction, would I lower my paddle? Would I sell the bike when Billy first asked? Would I avoid the entire chain reaction? The honest answer is uncomfortable no. Because altering my behavior to accommodate someone else's recklessness doesn't prevent recklessness. It postpones it. And postponement isn't prevention. Asterisk, if it hadn't been my Harley, it would have been something else. Another machine. Another shortcut. Another thrill. The core issue wasn't access. It was character. And character isn't fixed by removing temptation. It's shaped by boundaries. Years later, the street looks like any other. Children ride safely. Parents supervise more closely. The HOA remains uneventful, which is the highest compliment it can receive. No one references the lawsuit anymore. No one says, "You're the reason my son is dead." That sentence has dissolved into history, and history, when processed properly, becomes lesson instead of weapon. There is something people misunderstand about accountability. They think it's harsh. They think it lacks compassion. But true accountability is what protects communities from repeating harm. Without it, grief mutates into blame. Blame mutates into persecution. Persecution mutates into injustice. The court didn't just dismiss a case. It stabilized reality, and stability allowed healing. Not dramatic healing. Quiet healing. The kind that doesn't trend. The kind that lasts. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is silent and the streetlights hum softly overhead, I imagine that first ride again. The controlled engine, the cool air, the sense of harmless satisfaction. I let that memory remain untouched, because it deserves to exist separate from what followed. Not every beginning is responsible for its ending. Sometimes a beginning is just a beginning, and what others choose to do afterward is entirely their own. If there's one truth this entire story proves, it's this: possession is not provocation, envy is not injustice, and tragedy does not rewrite responsibility. Consequences don't arrive out of cruelty. They arrive because action demands response. Indifferent, precise, on schedule. Billy made a choice. Karen defended the wrong lessons the neighborhood learned too late, and I refused to accept a blame that wasn't mine. That refusal wasn't revenge. It was boundary. And boundary is what keeps truth intact when emotion tries to distort it. The Harley, it's gone. The lawsuit is closed. The street is calm. Peace didn't return dramatically. It returned gradually, like silence, reclaiming space after noise burns itself out. And in that silence, one thing remains certain. I know where my hands were, and what they never touched. What people don't seethe. What people don't sieve. Always a part of the story that never gets told. Not because it's hidden, because it's quiet. After the lawsuit ended, after Karen moved away after the neighborhood stabilized. People assumed the chapter was closed. From the outside, it looked resolved. No more hearings. No more accusations. No more tension hanging in the air. But closure isn't a public event. It's internal, and internally things take longer. For a while, I found myself analyzing everyday behavior differently. At grocery stores, at gas stations, at traffic lights. I started noticing how often people confuse desire with entitlement. Someone cuts a line because they're in a hurry. Someone demands a discount because they deserve better. Someone pushes limits because no one has stopped them before. That pattern is everywhere. Billy wasn't unique. He was amplified. He grew up in an environment where consequences were negotiable. Every small incident that should have corrected him was softened. Every mistake was reframed. Every warning became someone else's fault. Correction delayed becomes correction denied, and denial over time becomes dangerous. I sometimes think about the first moment he saw the Harley at the auction. Maybe his heart jumped. Maybe he imagined himself riding it through the neighborhood, admired, respected. Maybe in his mind, ownership meant arrival, but wanting something isn't the same as earning it, and the distance between those two ideas can be fatal. What people don't see is how subtle the turning points are. The crash wasn't the turning point. The lawsuit wasn't. The turning points were earlier. The first time he took something small and faced no consequence. The first time Karen defended him instead of correcting him. The first time neighbors looked away instead of speaking up. Those were the real pivots, but those don't make headlines. They build quietly, years later. When I reflect on everything, I don't replay the crash. I replay the warnings, the hovering glances, the forced friendliness, the thinly veiled threats disguised as offers. Those were the signals, and signals matter. We live in a world that ignores early signals because they seem minor. We wait for something dramatic before we act, but by then, the outcome is already in motion. If there's one thing this entire experience taught me, it's this: small behavior repeated without correction becomes identity. Identity drives decisions. Decisions create outcomes. The sequence is simple. People just prefer to focus on the last step. I've also learned something about blame. Blame feels productive. It gives grief direction. It makes chaos feel organized. When Karen blamed me, it wasn't because she believed I physically caused the crash. It was because she needed structure for her pain. If she could assign fault outward, she wouldn't have to look inward. That's human, but it's also destructive because inward examination is where growth lives. Outward blame is where stagnation hides. Eventually, even she realized that too late to change the past, but not too late to understand it. There's another part people don't see. Strength isn't loud. I didn't win. There was no celebration when the case collapsed. No relief party. No victory speech. There was only steadiness. Holding ground, refusing distortion. Maintaining documentation. Sometimes strength is just consistency under pressure, and consistency is rarely dramatic, but it's powerful. Every now and then, someone new hears the story and asks quietly, "Do you forgive her?" It's an interesting question. Forgiveness suggests anger still lives. Somewhere active, it doesn't. What happened wasn't personal revenge. It was consequence. Meeting denial. I don't carry anger. I carry understanding. Understanding is heavier at first, but lighter long term. The street is ordinary now. That's the greatest sign of recovery. Kids ride carefully. Parents supervise more intentionally. The HOA functions without theatrics, and no one confuses possession with provocation anymore, at least not openly. That's growth, not perfect, but measurable. If I could summarize everything in one sentence, it would be this: power reveals character faster than comfort ever will. Give someone speed, money, authority, or control, and you'll see who they really are. Billy revealed. Recklessness. Karen revealed denial. The neighborhood revealed passivity, and I revealed something. I didn't know I had patience under pressure. Not heroic patience, not dramatic. Resilience, just the ability to stand still when pushed, and sometimes, that's enough. Life didn't become extraordinary after all this. It became normal, and normal is underrated. Normal means no accusations, no flashing lights, no courtrooms, just evenings that pass quietly and quiet. After chaos feels earned. That's the part people don't see. Not the crash, not the courtroom, not the confrontation, but the slow rebuilding of balance, the subtle correction of culture, the steady return of accountability. Consequences don't shout, they arrive, and when understood properly, they leave behind something better than revenge. They leave behind awareness.